So in this module, we're going to turn our attention to some of the skills that Perry and his co-authors suggest facilitate good philosophy. So the first skill that they point to is the ability to analyze statements and arguments. And the rationale they give us for why that is good for consuming or producing philosophy is that it helps us to evaluate the likely truth of the statement or the conclusion of the argument. And I think that's right. So, for example, when I first started studying philosophy, I remember I was sitting in a coffee house with some friends, and someone said, "There are no true universals." And I thought about that for a second, and I said to myself, well, that can't be a true statement because it's a universal statement. And so if it were true, it would have to be false. And so I was all excited. Didn't go over well in the coffee house per se, but it was an evaluation, an analysis of a statement that showed that the statement was internally inconsistent. It couldn't be true. It rendered itself false. The next sort of skill that they point to is imagining alternatives to familiar views and situations. And this is very important. Human beings oftentimes have a difficult time imagining alternative perspectives, understanding other people, understanding how the world might work in a different situation, and so on. And so the ability to do this, to see possibilities, to see how the world could be different, turns out to be a very important skill. And it definitely turns out to be a very important skill in philosophy, as philosophers will oftentimes evaluate arguments and statements by thinking about counterfactuals, by thinking about situations or statements that aren't actually currently true, but could be true. So they allow us, this ability rather, allows us to understand and to test statements, views, arguments by thinking about whether or not they would hold up if things were different, if there was some other alternative or possibility out there. So here's an example. Right? Generally speaking, people will accept the truism that it's wrong to lie. And that seems to be a really good general view. It's wrong to lie to people. When you deliberately deceive people, you undermine their trust, you make it difficult for information to be exchanged in a straightforward fashion, you make it harder for commerce to occur, so on and so forth. But in one of his dialogues, the ancient Greek philosopher Plato thought about that statement, and he said to himself, well, suppose, say, and this, of course, isn't the exact example that he gave. Suppose, say, that someone comes up to you and they're packing an automatic assault rifle and a big knife, and they got this demented look in their face, and they say, "Where's Wallace?" All right. Well, I would suggest to you that in that situation, it isn't wrong to lie to that person. It isn't wrong to say, like, oh, I don't know. Because if you don't lie, if you tell them the truth, oh, Wallace is up in his office, that might well result in all sorts of havoc and unfortunate outcomes. And so Plato imagined a case where someone was despondent and was demanding, where's their sword? And so Plato said, that it's not wrong to lie to that person, to not tell that person where their sword is until they've had time to calm down. And so even a sort of general truism, like it's wrong to lie, isn't necessarily going to hold up in every single case. And we can understand why it's good and why it's bad by understanding the alternatives where it seems not to hold, and contrasting those to the alternatives where it seems clearly a good idea.